Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. The time is 2:02 p.m. You have to laugh. On the 12th of July 2025, and me and my smushed lipstick thought we would read the last story or two of W. Somerset Maugham's 30 Great Short Stories. I literally have not sat down since I woke up this morning at about 8:30. I've been doing ridiculous odd jobs like labelling things in my pantry and washing all the jars and working out which jars I want to keep and which I don't, and just faffing about all day really. But I've had a wonderful morning and afternoon so far, listening to all my favourite YouTube videos about ufology and working away, beavering away at my little odd jobs, doing dishes, just kind of keeping myself busy really. So I thought it's time to sit out in the garden with my boys. They've been out here since about midday, and I thought I'd keep them a bit of company and I would read to my wonderful YouTube audience and subscribers. So here we go. This story is titled Miss King. It was not till the beginning of September that Ashenden, a writer by profession, who had been abroad at the outbreak of the war, managed to get back to England. He chanced, soon after his arrival, to go to a party, and was there introduced to a middle-aged colonel, whose name he did not catch. He had some talk with him. We've got competition. As he was about to leave, this officer came up to him and asked, "I say, I wonder if you'd mind coming to see me. I'd rather like to have a chat with you." "Certainly," said Ashenden, "whenever you like." "What about tomorrow at 11? "All right. I'll just write down my address. Have you a card on you?" Ashenden gave him one, and on this the colonel scribbled in pencil the name of a street and the number of a house. When Ashenden walked along next morning to keep his appointment, he found himself in a street of rather vulgar red brick houses in a part of London that had once been fashionable, but was now fallen in the esteem of the house hunter who wanted a good address. On the house at which Ashenden had been asked to call, there was a board up to announce that it was for sale. The shutters were closed, and there was no sign that anyone lived in it. He rang the bell, and the door was opened by a non-commissioned officer so promptly that he was startled. He was not asked his business, but led immediately into a long room at the back, once evidently a dining room, the florid decoration of which looked oddly out of keeping with the office furniture, shabby and sparse, that was in it. It gave Ashenden the impression of a room in which the brokers had taken possession. The colonel, who was known in the intelligence department, as Ashenden later discovered, by the letter R, rose when he came in and shook hands with him. He was a man somewhat above the middle height, lean, with a yellow, deeply lined face, thin grey hair, and a toothbrush moustache. I'm thinking that's a bit like Hitler's moustache, isn't it? That stupid little... Yes. Well, I guess it was the fashion in the 40s, and a lot of these stories are set in that time period. The thing immediately noticeable about him was the closeness with which his blue eyes were set. He only just escaped a squint. They were hard and cruel eyes and very wary, and they gave him a cunning, shifty look. Here was a man that you could neither like nor trust at first sight. His manner was pleasant and cordial. He asked Ashenden a good many questions, and then, without further to do, suggested that he had particular qualifications for the Secret Service. Ashenden was acquainted with several European languages, and his profession was excellent cover. On the pretext that he was writing a book, he could, without attracting attention, visit any neutral country. It was while they were discussing this point that R said, "You know, you ought to get material that would be very useful to you in your work." "I shouldn't mind that," said Ashenden. "I'll tell you an incident that occurred only the other day, and I can vouch for its truth. I thought at the time it would make a damned good story. One of the French ministers went down to Nice to recover from a cold, and he had some very important documents with him that he kept in a dispatch case. They were very important indeed. Well, a day or two after he arrived, he picked up a yellow-haired lady at some restaurant or other where there was dancing, and he got friendly with her. To cut a long story short, he took her back to his hotel. Of course, it was a very imprudent thing to do, and when he came to himself in the morning, the lady and the dispatch case had disappeared. They had 1 or 2 drinks up in his room, and his theory is that when his back was turned, the woman slipped a drug into his glass. R finished and looked at Ashenden with a gleam in his close-set eyes. "Dramatic, isn't it?" he said. "Do you mean to say that happened the other day? The week before last?" "Impossible!" cried Ashenden. "Why, we've been putting that incident on the stage for 60 years. We've written it in 1,000 novels. Do you mean to say that life has only just caught up with us?" R was a trifle disconcerted. "Well, if necessary, I could give you names and dates, and believe me, the Allies have been put to no end of trouble by the loss of the documents that the dispatch case contained." "Well, sir, if you can't do better than that in the Secret Service," sighed Ashenden, "I'm afraid that as a source of inspiration to the writer of fiction, it's a washout. We really can't write that story much longer." It did not take them long to settle things, and when Ashenden rose to go, he had already made careful note of his instructions. He was to start for Geneva next day. The last words that R said to him, with a casualness that made them impressive, were, "There's just one thing I think you ought to know before you take on this job, and don't forget it. If you do well, you'll get no thanks, And if you get into trouble, you'll get no help. Does that suit you? Perfectly. Then I'll wish you good afternoon. Ashendon was on his way back to Geneva. The night was stormy and the wind blew cold from the mountains, but the stodgy little steamer plodded sturdily through the choppy waters of the lake. A scudding rain, just turning into sleet, swept the deck in angry gusts, like a nagging woman who cannot leave a subject alone. Ashendon had been to France in order to write and dispatch a report. A day or two before, about 5 in the afternoon, an Indian agent of his had come to see him in his rooms. It was only by a lucky chance that he was in, for he had no appointment with him, and the agent's instructions were to come to the hotel only in a case of urgent importance. He told Ashendon that a Bengali in the German service had recently come from Berlin with a black cane trunk in which were a number of documents interesting to the British government. At that time, the Central Powers were doing their best to foment such an agitation in India as would make it necessary for Great Britain to keep her troops in the country and perhaps send others from France. It had been found possible to get the Bengali arrested in Bern on a charge that would keep him out of harm's way for a while. And very clever fellow, and he mixed freely with such of his countrymen. Sorry, I've skipped somewhere there. Dear goddess. Right, let's start that sentence again. I'm completely flipped my jiggity lid. Right, here we go. It had been found possible to get the Bengali arrested in Bern on a charge that would keep him out of harm's way for a while, but the black cane trunk could not be found. Ashendon's agent was a very brave and very clever fellow, and he mixed freely with such of his countrymen as were disaffected to the interests of Great Britain. In my defence, no fucking paragraphs. No paragraphs. Makes it hard to read, people of Earth. He had just discovered that the Bengali, before going to Bern, had, for greater safety, left the trunk in the cloakroom at Zurich station, and now that he was in jail awaiting trial, was unable to get the bulletin by which it might be obtained into the hands of any of his confederates. It was a matter of great urgency for the German intelligence department to secure the contents of the trunk without delay. I'm being stalked by the bush turkey. And since it was impossible for them to get hold of it by the original official means, they had decided to break into the station that very night and steal it. It was a bold and ingenious scheme, and Ashendon felt a pleasant exhilaration, for a great deal of his work was uncommonly dull when he heard of it. He recognised the dashing and unscrupulous touch of the head of the German Secret Service at Bern. But the burglary was arranged for 2 o'clock on the following morning, and there was not a moment to lose. He could trust neither the telegraph nor the telephone to communicate with the British officer at Berne, and since the Indian agent could not go, he was taking his life in his hands by coming to see Ashendon, and if he were noticed leaving his room, it might easily be that he would be found one day floating in the lake with a knife thrust in his back. There was nothing for it but to go himself. There was a train to Berne that he could just catch, and he put on his hat and coat as he ran downstairs. He jumped into a cab. 4 hours later, he rang the bell of the headquarters of the intelligence department. His name was known there but to one person, and it was for him that Ashendon asked. A tall, tired-looking man whom he had not met before came out and and without a word led him into an office. Ashendon told him his errand. The tall man looked at his watch. It's too late for us to do anything ourselves. We couldn't possibly get to Zurich in time. He reflected. We'll put the Swiss authorities on the job. They can telephone, and when your friends attempt their little burglary, I have no doubt they'll find the station well guarded. Anyhow, you had better get back to Geneva. He shook hands with Ashendon and showed him out. Ashendon was well aware that he would never know what happened then, being no more than a tiny rivet in a vast and complicated machine. He never had the advantage of seeing a completed action. He was concerned with the beginning or the end of it, perhaps, or with some incident in the middle. But what his own doings led to, he had seldom a chance of discovering. It was as unsatisfactory as those modern novels that give you a number of unrelated episodes and expect you, by piecing them together, to construct in your mind a connected narrative. Notwithstanding his fur coat and his muffler, Ashendon was chilled to the bone. It was warm in the saloon and there were good lights to read by, but he thought it better not to sit there in case some habitual traveller, recognising him, wondered why he made these constant journeys between Geneva in Switzerland and Tonon in France, and so, making the best of what shelter could be found, he passed a tedious time in the darkness of the deck. He looked in the direction of Geneva, but could see no lights, and the sleet turning into snow prevented him from recognising the landmarks. Lake Leman, on fine days so trim and pretty, artificial like a piece of water in a French garden. My little butcher bird is here. Hello, have you come to visit the Mummy? Hello, beautiful boy. Hello. I've got no chicken for you. I'm completely useless. But you love me anyway, don't you? What do you think of that, little Bo? You got the butcher bird coming to whistle to you. I'll show you. Just very carefully. I'll show you. You gonna say hello to the people of Earth, butcher bird? Can you see him? He's the sweetest little thing. Are you the sweetest little thing? Yes, you are. And here's my little Bo. And here's my little Kermie. Right. Snow White minus the 7 dwarfs equals paradise, babies. Right, where were we? I'll start that again. Lake Lemans, on fine days so trim and pretty, artificial like a piece of water in a French garden, in this tempestuous weather, was as secret and as menacing as the sea. He made up his mind that, on getting back to his hotel, he would have a fire lit in his sitting room, a hot bath, and dinner comfortably by the fireside in pyjamas and a dressing gown. The prospect of spending an evening by himself with his pipe and a book was so agreeable that it made the misery of that journey across the lake positively worthwhile. He's looking at you, Bo. He's looking at you. He probably would attack you if you were out of the cage, to be fair. He's a sweet little baby. You sweet little baby. Yes, I know. He's freaking out a little bit. You're allowed to freak out. He's wild and free and you're trapped and domesticated and paradise with the mama tea. What fresh hell is this, he's saying. What fresh hell is this? Right, here we go. It's not so bad. It's a beautiful day. We're all very happy, actually. The prospect of spending an evening by himself with his pipe and a book was so agreeable that it made the misery of that journey across the lake positively worthwhile. 2 sailors tramped past him heavily, their heads bent down to save themselves from the sleet that blew in their faces, and one of them shouted to him. Oh, he's moved on, but he sang as he left. Sweet boy. One of them shouted to him, "Nous arrivons." They went to the side and withdrew a bar to allow passage from the gangway, and looking again, Ashendon, through the howling darkness, saw, mistily, the lights of the quay. A welcome sight. In 2 or 3 minutes the steamer was made fast, and Ashendon, muffled to the eyes, joined himself to the little knot of passengers that waited to step ashore. Although he made the journey so often, it was his duty to cross the lake into France once a week to deliver his reports and to receive instructions. He had always a faint sense of trepidation when he stood among the crowd at the gangway and waited to land. There was nothing on his passport to show that he had been in France. The steamer went round the lake, touching French soil at 2 places, but going from Switzerland to Switzerland, so that his journey might have been to Vevey or to Lausanne, but he could never be sure that the secret police had not taken note of him, and if he had been followed and seen to land in France, the fact that there was no stamp on his passport would be difficult to explain. Of course he had his story ready, but he knew well that it was not a very convincing one, and though it might be impossible for the Swiss authorities to prove that he was anything but a casual traveller, he might nevertheless spend 2 or 3 days in jail, which would be uncomfortable, and then be firmly conducted to the frontier, which would be mortifying. The Swiss knew well that their country was the scene of all manner of intrigues. Agents of the Secret Service, spies, revolutionaries, and agitators infested the hotels of the principal towns, and, jealous of their neutrality, they were determined to prevent conduct that might embroil them with any of the belligerent powers. There were, as usual, 2 police officers on the quay to watch the passengers disembark, and Ashenden, walking past them with as unconcerned an air as he could assume, was relieved that he had got safely by. The darkness swallowed him up, and he stepped out briskly for his hotel. The wild weather, with a scornful gesture, had swept all the neatness from the trim promenade. The shops were closed, and Ashenden passed only an occasional pedestrian who sidled along, scrunched up, as though he fled from the blind wrath of the unknown. You had a feeling in that black and bitter night that civilization, ashamed of its artificiality, cowered before the fury of elemental things. Indeed it does. It was hail now that blew in Ashenden's face, and the pavement was wet and slippery, so that he had to walk with caution. The hotel faced the lake. Just checking. Might have to split this into 2 videos because I'm filming on my iPhone and I have problems uploading if it's too long. I have problems uploading anyway, but the longer the more problems. Just saying. The hotel faced the lake. When he reached it and a page boy opened the door for him, he entered the hall with a flurry of wind that sent the papers on the porter's desk flying into the air. Ashenden was dazzled by the light. He stopped to ask the porter if there were letters for him. There was nothing, and he was about to get into the lift when the porter told him that 2 gentlemen were waiting in his room to see him. Ashenden had no friends in Geneva. Oh, he answered, not a little surprised. Who are they? He had taken care to get on friendly terms with the porter, and his tips for trifling services had been generous. The porter gave a discreet smile. There is no harm in telling you. I think they are members of the police. What do they want? Asked Ashenden. They did not say. They asked me where you were, and I told them you had gone for a walk. They said they would wait till you came back. How long have they been here? Been there. Oh, what did you freak out from? Oh, the kookaburra and the crows. It's a reasonable thing to freak out from when you're a little birdie. How long have they been there? An hour. Ashenden's heart sank, but he took care not to let his face betray his concern. I'll go up and see them, he said. The lift man stood aside to let him step into the lift, but Ashenden shook his head. I'm so cold, he said. I'll walk up. He wished to give himself a moment to think, but as he ascended the 3 flights, slowly his feet were like lead. Got a lot of electricity in me today, my hair's gluing to me like Medusa hair. Well, it looks rather lovely after I washed it this morning. I say so myself. Yes, indeed. Right, where were we? He wished to give himself a moment to think, but as he ascended the 3 flights slowly, his feet were like lead. There could be small doubt why 2 police officers were so bent upon seeing him. He felt, on a sudden, dreadfully tired. He did not feel he could cope with a multitude of questions, and if he were arrested as a secret agent, he must spend at least the night in a cell. He longed more than ever for a hot bath and a pleasant dinner by his fireside. He had half a mind to turn tail and walk out of the hotel, leaving everything behind him. He had his passport in his pocket, and he knew by heart the hours at which trains started for the frontier. Before the Swiss authorities had made up their minds what to do, he would be in safety. But he continued to trudge upstairs. He did not like the notion of abandoning his job so easily. He had been sent to Geneva, knowing the risks, and to do work of a certain kind. And it seemed to him that he had better go through with it. Just eyeballing the scrub turkey, who's eyeballing me. Don't even think about it, Scrubber. I'm watching you, you little bastard buzzard. I call him BB for short usually. He's sitting here with bare feet, and he's been known to attack my toes before, so I'm a bit hyper vigilant. Of course, it would not be very nice to spend 2 years in a Swiss prison, but the chance of this was, like assassination to kings, one of the inconveniences of his profession. He reached the landing of the 3rd floor and walked to his room. Ashenden had in him, it seems, a strain of flippancy, on account of which, indeed, the critics had often reproached him, and as he stood for a moment outside the door, his predicament appeared to him, on a sudden, rather droll. His spirits went up, and he determined to brazen the thing out. It was with a genuine smile on his lips that he turned the handle and, entering the room, faced his visitors. "Good evening, gentlemen," said he. The room was brightly lit, but for all the lights were on, and a fire burned in the hearth. The air was grey with smoke, since the strangers, finding it long to wait for him, had been smoking strong and inexpensive cigars. They sat in their great coats and bowler hats, as though they had only just that moment come in, but the ashes in the little tray on the table would alone have suggested, who have we got here? Mr. Crow and my little butcher bird. Would alone have suggested that they had been long enough there to make themselves familiar with their surroundings. They were 2 powerful men with black moustaches, on the stout side, heavily built, and they reminded Ashenden of Fafner and Fasolt, the giants in the Rheingold. Their clumsy boots, the massive way they sat in their chairs, and the ponderous alertness of their expression made it obvious that they were members of the detective force. Ashenden gave his room an enveloping glance. He was a neat creature and saw at once that his things, though not in disorder, were not as he had left them. He guessed that an examination had been made of his effects. That did not disturb him, for he left in his room no document that would compromise him. His code he had learned by heart and destroyed before leaving England, and such communications as reached him from Germany were handed to him by third parties and transmitted without delay to the proper places. There was nothing he need fear in a search, but the impression that it had been made confirmed his suspicion that he had been denounced to the authorities as a secret agent. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked affably. "It's warm in here. Wouldn't you like to take off your coats and hats?" It faintly irritated him that they should sit there with their hats on. "We're only staying a minute," said one of them. "We were passing, and as the concierge said you would be in at once, we thought we would wait." He did not remove his hat. Ashenden unwrapped his scarf and disembarrassed himself of his heavy coat. "Won't you have a cigar?" he asked, offering the box to the two detectives in turn. "I don't mind if I do," said the first, Fafner, taking one, upon which the second, Fasolt, helped himself without a word, even of thanks. The name on the box appeared to have a singular effect on their manners, for both now took off their hats. "You must have had a very disagreeable walk in this bad weather," said Fafner, as he bit half an inch off the end of his cigar and spat it in the fireplace. Now it was Ashenden's principle, a good one in life as well as in the intelligence department, always to tell as much of the truth as he conveniently could, so he answered as follows. "What do you take me for? I wouldn't go out in such weather if I could help it. I had to go to Vevey today to see an invalid friend, and I came back by boat. It was bitter on the lake." "We come from the police," said Fafner casually. Ashenden thought they must consider him a perfect idiot if they imagined he had not guessed that, but it was not a piece of information to which it was discreet to reply with a pleasantry. "Oh, really?" he said. "Have you your passport on you?" "Yes. In these war times I think a foreigner is wise always to keep his passport on him." "Very wise." Ashenden handed the man the nice new passport, which gave no information about his movements other than that he had come from London 3 months before and had since then crossed no frontier. The detective looked at it carefully and passed it on to his colleague. "It appears to be all in order," he said. Ashenden, standing in front of the fire to warm himself, a cigarette between his lips, made no reply. He watched the detectives warily, but with an expression, he flattered himself, of amiable unconcern. Fasolt handed back the passport to Fafner, who tapped it reflectively with a thick forefinger. "The chief of police told us to come here," he said, and Ashenden was conscious that both of them now looked at him with attention. "To make a few inquiries of you." Ashenden knew that When you have nothing apposite to say, it is better to hold your tongue. And when a man has made a remark that calls to his mind for an answer, he is apt to find silence a trifle disconcerting. Ashenden waited for the detective to proceed. He was not quite sure, but it seemed to him that he hesitated. It appears that there have been a good many complaints lately of the noise that people make when they come out of the casino late at night. We wish to know if you personally have been troubled by the disturbance. It is evident that as your rooms look on the lake and the revellers pass your windows, if the noise is serious, you must have heard it. For an instant, Ashenden was dumbfounded. What balderdash was this? The detective was talking to him. Boom, boom, he heard the big drum as the giant lumbered on the scene. And why on earth should the chief of police send to him to find out if his beauty sleep had been disturbed by vociferous gamblers? It looked very like a trap. But nothing is so foolish as to ascribe profundity to what on the surface is merely inept. It is a pitfall into which many an ingenuous reviewer has fallen headlong. Ashenden had a confident belief in the stupidity of the human animal, which in the course of his life had stood him in good stead. Indeed, people of earth, by the gods. It flashed across him that if the detective asked him such a question, it was because he had no shadow of proof that he was engaged in any illegal practice. It was clear that he had been denounced, but no evidence had been offered, and the search of his rooms had been fruitless. But what a silly excuse was this to make for a visit, and what a poverty of invention it showed. Ashenden immediately thought of 3 reasons the detectives might have given for seeking an interview with him, and he wished that he were on terms sufficiently familiar with them to make the suggestions. This was really an insult to the intelligence. These men were even stupider than he thought. But Ashenden had always a soft corner in his heart for the stupid, and now he looked upon them with a feeling of unexpected kindliness. He would have liked to pat them gently, but he answered the question with gravity. To tell you the truth, I am a very sound sleeper, the result doubtless of a pure heart and an easy conscience, and I have never heard a thing. Ashenden looked at them for the faint smile that he thought his remark deserved, but their countenances remained stolid. Ashenden, as well as an agent of the British government, was a humorist, and he stifled the beginnings of a sigh. He assumed a slightly imposing air and adopted a more serious tone. But even if I had been awakened by noisy people, I should not dream of complaining. At a time when there is so much trouble, misery, and unhappiness in the world, I cannot but think it very wrong to disturb the amusement of persons who are lucky enough to be able to amuse themselves. En effet, said the detective. But the fact remains that people have been disturbed, and the chief of police thought the matter should be inquired into. His colleague, who had hitherto preserved a silence that was positively sphinx-like, now broke it. "I noticed by your passport that you are an author, monsieur," he said. Ashenden, in reaction from his previous perturbation, was feeling exceedingly debonair, and he answered with good humour, "It is true, it is a profession full of tribulation, but it has now and then its compensations." "La gloire," said Fafner politely. "Or, shall we say, notoriety?" hazarded Ashenden. "And what are you doing in Geneva?" The question was put so pleasantly that Ashenden felt it behooved him to be on his guard. A police officer, amiable, is more dangerous to the wise than a police officer, aggressive. "I am writing a play," said Ashenden. He waved his hand to the papers on his table. 4 eyes followed his gesture. A casual glance told him that the detectives had looked and taken note of his manuscripts. "And why should you write a play here rather than in your own country?" Ashenden smiled upon them with even more affability than before, since this was a question for which he had long been prepared, and it was a relief to give the answer. He was curious to see how it would go down. "Mais, monsieur, there is the war. My country is in turmoil. It would be impossible to sit there quietly and write a play." "Is it comedy or a tragedy?" "Oh, a comedy, and a light one at that," replied Ashenden. "The artist needs peace and quietness. How do you expect him to preserve that detachment of spirit that is demanded by creative work unless he can have perfect tranquility? Switzerland has the good fortune to be neutral, and it seemed to me that in Geneva I should find the very surroundings I wanted." Fafner nodded slightly to Fasolt, but whether to indicate that he thought Ashenden an imbecile, or whether in sympathy with his desire for a safe retreat from a turbulent world, Ashenden had no means of knowing. Anyhow, the detective evidently came to the conclusion that he could learn nothing more from talking to Ashenden, for his remarks grew now desultory, and in a few minutes he rose to go. "Hey, little boy." When Ashenden, having warmly shaken their hands, closed the door behind the pair, he heaved a great sigh of relief. He turned on the water for his bath, as hot as he thought he could possibly bear it, and as he undressed, reflected comfortably over his escape. The day before, an incident had occurred that had left him on his guard. There was in his service a Swiss, known in the intelligence department as Bernard, who had recently come from Germany, and Ashenden, desiring to see him, had instructed him to go to a certain cafe at a certain time, since he had not seen him before, so that there might be no mistake. He had informed him through an intermediary what question he himself would ask and what reply he was to give. He chose the luncheon. Lost my place all of a sudden. He chose the luncheon hour for the meeting, since the cafe was unlikely to be crowded, and it chanced that on entering he saw but one man of about the age he knew Bernard to be. He was by himself, and going up to him, Ashenden casually put to him the prearranged question. The prearranged answer was given, and sitting down beside him, Ashenden ordered himself a Dubonnet. The spy was a stocky little fellow, shabbily dressed, with a bullet-shaped head, close-cropped, fair, with shifty blue eyes and a sallow skin. He did not inspire confidence, and but that Ashendon knew by experience how hard it was to find men willing to go into Germany, he would have been surprised that his predecessor had engaged him. He was a German Swiss and spoke French with a strong accent. He immediately asked for his wages, and these Ashendon passed over to him in an envelope. They were in Swiss francs. He gave a general account of his stay in Germany and answered Ashendon's careful questions. He was, by calling, a waiter, and had found a job in a restaurant near one of the Rhine bridges, which gave him good opportunity to get information that was required of him. His reasons for coming to Switzerland for a few days were plausible, and there could apparently be no difficulty in his crossing the frontier on his return. Ashendon expressed his satisfaction with his behaviour, gave him his orders, and was prepared to finish the interview. "Very good," said Bernard, "but before I go back to Germany, I want 2,000 francs. "Do you?" "Yes, and I want them now, before you leave this cafe. It's a sum I have to pay, and I've got to have it. I'm afraid I can't give it to you." A scowl made the man's face even more unpleasant to look at than it was before. "You've got to. What makes you think that?" The spy, leaning forward and not raising his voice, but speaking so that only Ashendon could hear, burst out angrily, "Do you think I'm going on risking my life for that beggarly sum you give me? Not 10 days ago, a man was caught at Mainz and shot. Was that one of your men?" "We haven't got anyone at Mainz," said Ashendon carelessly, and for all he knew, it was true. He had been puzzled not to receive his usual communications from that place, and Bernard's information might afford the explanation. "You knew exactly what you were to get when you took on the job, and if you weren't satisfied, you needn't have taken it. I have no authority to give you a penny more." "Do you see what I've got here?" said Bernard. He took a small revolver out of his pocket and fingered it significantly. "What are you going to do with it? Pawn it?" With an angry shrug of the shoulders, he put it back in his pocket. Ashendon reflected that had he known anything of the technique of the theatre, Bernard would have been aware that it was useless to make a gesture that had no ulterior meaning. Oh, you have to laugh. "You refuse to give me the money?" "Certainly." The spy's manner, which at first had been obsequious, was now somewhat truculent, but he kept his head and never for a moment raised his voice. Ashendon could see that Bernard, however big a ruffian, was a reliable agent, and he made up his mind to suggest to R that his salary should be raised. The scene diverted him. A little way off, 2 fat citizens of Geneva with black beards were playing dominoes, and on the other side a young man with spectacles was with great rapidity writing sheet after sheet of an immensely long letter. A Swiss family, Who knows, perhaps Robinson by name. Consisting of a father and mother and 4 children, were sitting round a table making the best of 2 small cups of coffee. The caissière behind the counter, an imposing brunette with a large bust encased in black silk, was reading the local paper. The surroundings made the melodramatic scene in which Ashenden was engaged perfectly grotesque. His own play seemed to him much more real. Bernard smiled. His smile was not engaging. Do you know that I have only to go to the police and tell them about you to have you arrested? Do you know what a Swiss prison is like? No, I've often wondered lately. Do you? Yes, and you wouldn't very much like it. One of the things that had bothered Ashenden was the possibility that he would be arrested before he finished his play. He disliked the notion of leaving it half done. Just checking we're still filming, yes. He disliked the notion of leaving it half done for an indefinite period. He did not know whether he would be treated as a political prisoner or as a common criminal, and he had a mind to ask Bernard whether in the latter case, the only one Bernard was likely to know anything about, he would be allowed writing materials. He was afraid Bernard would think the inquiry an attempt to laugh at him, but he was feeling comparatively at ease and was able to answer Bernard's threat without heat. You could, of course, get me sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment, at least. No, that is the maximum, I understand, and I think it is quite enough. I won't conceal from you that I should find it extremely disagreeable, but not nearly as disagreeable as you would. What could you do? Oh, we'd get you somehow. And after all, the war won't last forever. You are a waiter. You want your freedom of action. I promise you that if I get into any trouble, you will never be admitted into any of the Allied countries for the rest of your life. I can't help thinking it would cramp your style. Bernard did not reply, but looked down sulkily at the marble-topped table. Ashenden thought this was the moment to pay for the drinks and go. Think it over, Bernard, he said. If you want to go back to your job, you have your instructions and your usual wages shall be paid through the usual channels. The spy shrugged his shoulders, and Ashenden, though not knowing in the least what was the result of their conversation, felt that it behooved him to walk out with dignity. He did so. And now, as he carefully put one foot into the bath, wondering if he could bear it, he asked himself what Bernard had in the end decided on. The water was just not scalding, and he gradually let himself down into it. On the whole, it seemed to him that the spy had thought it would be as well to go straight, and the source of his denunciation must be looked for elsewhere, perhaps in the hotel itself. Ashenden lay back, and as his body grew used to the heat of the water, gave a sigh of satisfaction. Really, he reflected, there are moments in life when all this to-do that has led from the primeval slime to myself seems almost worthwhile. Ashenden could not but think he was lucky to have wriggled out of the fix he had found himself in that afternoon. Had he been arrested and in due course sentenced, R, shrugging his shoulders, would merely have called him a damned fool and set about looking for someone to take his place. Already Ashenden knew his chief well enough to be aware that when he had told him that if he got into trouble he need look for no help, he meant exactly what he said. Ashenden, lying comfortably in his bath, was glad to think that in all probability he would be able to finish his play in peace. The police had drawn a blank, and though they might watch him from now on with some care. Hello, how are ya? You look good, blonde. Oh, me too, darling. We all have to fake it till we make it. The police had drawn a blank, and though they might watch him from now on with some care, it was unlikely that they would take a further step until he had at least roughed out his third act. It behooved him to be prudent. Only a fortnight ago, his colleague at Lausanne had been sentenced to a term of imprisonment. But it would be foolish to be alarmed. His predecessor in Geneva, seeing himself with an exaggerated sense of his own importance, shadowed from morning till night, had been so affected by the nervous strain that it had been found necessary to withdraw him. Twice a week, Ashenden had to go to the market to receive instructions that were brought to him by an old peasant woman from French Savoy who sold butter and eggs. She came in with the other market women, and the search at the frontier was perfunctory. It was barely dawn when they crossed, and the officials were only too glad to have done quickly with these chattering, noisy women and get back to their warm fires and their cigars. Indeed, this old lady looked so bland and innocent, with her corpulence, her fat, red face, and her smiling, good-natured mouth. It would have been a very astute detective who could imagine that if he took the trouble to put his hand deep down between those voluminous breasts of hers, he would find a little piece of paper that would land in the dock an honest old woman who kept her son out of the trenches by taking this risk, and an English writer approaching middle age. Ashenden went to the market about 9, when the housewives of Geneva, for the most part, had done their provisioning. Stopped in front of the basket by the side of which, rain or wind, hot or cold, sat that indomitable creature, and bought half a pound of butter. She slipped the note into his hand when he was given change for 10 francs, and he sauntered away. His only moment of risk was when he walked back to his hotel with the paper in his pocket, and after this scare he made up his mind to shorten as much as possible the period during which it could be found on him. Ashenden sighed, for the water was no longer quite so hot. He could not reach the tap with his hand, nor could he turn it with his toes, as every properly regulated tap should turn, and if he got up enough to add more hot water, he might just as well get out altogether. On the other hand, he could not pull the plug with his foot in order to empty the bath and so force himself to get out, nor could he find himself the willpower to step out of it like a man. He had often heard people tell him that he possessed character, and he reflected that people judge hastily in the affairs of life because they judge on insufficient evidence. They had never seen him in a hot but diminishingly hot bath. His mind, however, wandered back to his play, and telling himself jokes and repartees that he knew by bitter experience would never look so neat on paper, nor sound so well on the stage as they did then. He abstracted his mind from the fact that his bath was growing almost tepid when he heard a knock at the door. Since he did not want anyone to enter, he had the presence of mind not to say "come in," but the knocking was repeated. Right, we're just going to split that there because it's getting awfully cold out here and I want to bring the birdies inside, and I'll upload this and I'll continue reading this story forthwith, people of Earth. Bye for now.